Hi everybody. In this video we're going to play around with some particles and learn how to simulate some cereal pouring out of a box using particles. So first I just wanted to open up an empty scene so we can start talking about what particles are and sort of how they work. So all of this is going to be under the effects menu. You'll see that we have NParticles, and actually you'll see quite a few things with the letter N in front of it. N stands for nucleus, and it's one of Maya's many different simulation engines. So this is going to simulate fabric, like cloth, N-cloth. It'll also simulate NParticles, and we can use some of it as well on fluids. But you'll also recognize that there's a lot of different types of simulation things inside of Maya, including Bifrost, which is going to do liquid simulations like water and fluids. And you're also going to, it's not currently open on mine, but we have a rigid and soft body simulation system called Bullet. So a whole bunch of different ways to simulate a lot of different things. But right now we're going to deal with particles. And particles are going to be, if I go to NParticles, you'll see that there's a Create Emitter button here, and then down here there's another Create Emitter button, but above that you'll see Legacy Particles. So there's two different types of particle emitters in here, particle systems in here, and this top one is actually the one that is going to be driven by nucleus, and so this means it'll interact with fabrics, it'll interact with any other nucleus object. So I'm going to use it. It's also, it just has a little bit of a better system. And we're going to use particles to emit or to create anything that is sort of made up of like very small amounts of difficult to control materials, right? So think of fire, think of smoke, some like sparks. And it's a whole bunch of small things. And if you put enough of those together, they can start feeling like a single thing, like a cloud, right? But in most cases, it's really just made up of a whole bunch of particles of liquid or debris or something like that. So that's what we're going to be dealing with. When I created an emitter, you'll see I actually got three objects. I got my emitter. I got this NParticle 1. This is the group of particles that are created by the emitter. And we got nucleus, and this is this little N that's right here in the middle of our scene, and this drives all of the physics simulations within the scene. So if I hit play, you'll see it's going to start spitting out a bunch of those points. And if I go up here and grab the emitter, you'll see it's the emitter that is spitting those points out. Right? So there we go. Now, the particles themselves change size. This N particle, that shape is always going to be a different size depending on how many particles are in the scene. Right? And so these are the three things that we need to recognize that we have control of. Now, with any simulation, if I try to scrub in the timeline, you're going to see I'm going to get like a really weird, like it's like it's only going to simulate as I go forward. And then when I release, you'll see I get an error that says nucleus evaluation skipped, frame change too large. When we're doing any simulation, Maya has to, before it can figure out what frame 23 looks like, it has to know what frame 22 looks like. So if it skips a frame or anything like that, it really messes up the simulation. So we're going to prevent that from happening by right-clicking and going to playback speed, play every frame, max real time. Okay, so that's going to make sure that it never skips a frame. It always plays the frame before it, right? Now, let's look at some of the settings in here. If I go to my emitter, and I'm going to go to my attribute editor, you'll see that currently I have an omni emitter. That means it's actually emitting it in all directions, right? But gravity immediately takes hold of it and starts pulling it toward the ground. So even though it's sort of spitting it out from this emitter in all directions, gravity pulls it back down toward the ground. So you see that kind of pulls it out. If we were to increase our speed of the particles being emitted, you're going to see that it rains them out much further before it starts to pull them down. I don't really need to do that. I'll just go ahead and put it back down to 1. We don't have to have an omni emitter. We can have a directional emitter, which is going to spit them out in a straight line. But then again, of course, gravity is going to take care of it or take hold of it. So there's a lot of different options for that, but I'm going to go ahead and do Omni. All right. And it's spitting them out. Now what it's doing is it's spitting out 100 particles per second. Okay, so I can change that number if I wanted to. If I wanted to put this up to something even crazier, I could do 1,000, and you're going to see it's going to rain down even more particles faster. Right. Now, if I were to set my timeline to something much longer, let's try 500. You're going to see that after a while, Maya's going to start to slow down a little bit. We're not really getting it too much right now, but well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I need to crank that number up a little higher so we can see that. But eventually Maya is going to really slow down because the number of particles that we have in here continues to grow, right? 10,000 a second, and we are multiple seconds in, so there are hundreds of thousands, or not hundreds of thousands yet, but there are multiple thousands of particles in here, and that number is just going to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and Maya is going to get slower and slower and slower. There we go. So we're starting to see it slow down because we are 300 frames in at 10,000 frames a second, and so nothing is dying. These are staying forever, right? So we can have that change. I can go to my NParticles. So if I needed to emit 10,000 particles a second and get this really dense cloud of stuff, but I didn't want them to live forever, under the NParticles, we have this lifespan option here. See, currently they're living forever, but I can change this to constant. And what this says is it's going to spit them out, and then they're all going to die after exactly 1 second. Okay? So if they're going somewhere where I don't want to see them anymore, or they disappear, or whatever, I can have them all die after a certain range. And so actually this means that there is at no point is there more than 10,000 particles on my screen. Now I can change this a little bit. I can go to random range, and I can say 1 second with a randomness of another second. So it's basically they're going to die 1 second plus or minus a second. And so we're going to get a little bit of a fall off for that. And then we can put like a little bit of differentiation in there. Or we could even do like 2 seconds on that. So you're going to see that we're getting a much slower progression as they start to die. But they're never going to really last much longer than 3 seconds, I guess. So that is a way that we can keep our scenes from going crazy, right? But when it comes time to render this, if I just hit render, and I rendered this, I have Arnold in here. Let me get a Skydome light. I'm just going to go ahead and do Arnold render view so we can see this. You're going to see that Arnold wants to render these particles as spheres, right? Now, Maya software gives us a lot of different options. Right? So we have this emitter, right? And there's a lot of different stuff we can change on this. I can change like how it collides with objects. I can change. Let's go ahead and look at that. I'm going to go ahead and change my emitter's lifespan again to be infinite. So we're just going to say live forever. Right? And I'll create a plane here on the ground and scale this up. And currently Maya doesn't necessarily know what to make of this plane, and it just thinks it's a mesh, and like there's nothing that necessarily says it has to interact with anything, right? But if I hit play, so it's just going to go through the floor until I tell Maya that this is actually an object that it should interact with. And so we can do that, strangely, under NCloth, because that is where we keep this create passive collider. So an NCloth object is something that's a mesh that's going to deform as a fabric. A passive collider is something that is going to collide or interact with that cloth or particles, but is not going to be simulated itself. It's more like a blocking object. So if I create passive collider out of that, you'll start to see that my particles are going to start accumulating on the floor, right? Now, some interesting things here. Currently, my NParticle 1, if I go down here, you'll see that I can do stuff like turn up the bounciness of these, right? And so now when they rain down, they're going to bounce straight up for some reason. I can turn down the friction. Let's see. That's funny. Sorry, I want to go ahead and turn down the number of them being emitted just so we can see this a little more clearly. So they're bouncing, but they're sort of not rolling too far, right? So like, there's a lot of stuff we can play around here and just get all sorts of different simulations. I can do some randomness to the speed, and we're going to start getting stuff that bounces a little bit more realistically, right? And so now these particles can rain down and continue to grow. But again, when I go to render this in Arnold, it's going to render it as a bunch of spheres, right? Now, inside of our viewport, we're currently seeing them as these little bitty tiny dots. And no matter how close we get, they're still just a dot, right? If we go down on our NParticle shape 1, if we go down toward the bottom to shading, we're going to start seeing that that's how we've told it to render these, right, as a single point. I could change this to multi-points, and what it's going to do is for every one of our points, it's going to render multiple little points, right? I could do streaks or multi-streaks, so we can start getting these sparks, right? And so that's kind of neat. But again, if I go to Arnold and render it, it's still just going to render them as those spheres, right? Arnold does not necessarily like particles. To get it to render as anything other than those spheres, and we get some really cool options in here, like clouds. If we wanted to do some, we can start getting some smoke and stuff like that. But again, Arnold isn't going to render it that way. Now, if I wanted to render with Maya software, it will give us a different result. So we are going to get that like fluffy cloud look there. But Maya software doesn't render anything else well. So we're not necessarily going to use particles as smoke quite that often, or at least not anymore. There's another option for that we can use that will work just as well. So I just kind of wanted to show you a bunch of the different things and recognize that Arnold is always going to render it as a solid sphere, right? Now, there's still a lot of different things we can control about this, but for now this is enough of just talking about how they work. Let's go ahead and go back to our breakfast scene, because what we're going to do now is we're going to use this emitter to fill up our cereal box, in my perspective view, with a bunch of particles. Okay, and I'm also going to go ahead and create a little sphere here, and this is going to be my piece of cereal. All right, so we have one piece of cereal. I'll go ahead and apply a new material to it. I'm going to make it a chocolatey piece of cereal, so we'll give him some brown color there, right? And we could also put like a bump on it or whatever we wanted to, but this is going to be my piece of cereal, and I want to fill this box full of these pieces of cereal. Now I could physically make hundreds of thousands of these and fill it up there and run some sort of physics simulation on that, but instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this with particles. I'm going to create a new emitter, again this top emitter, and I'm going to sort of place this in a position inside that box, or right above that box, so it will just start emitting particles into the box. Okay, so we see again it's just raining down these particles, but It's also spitting them through the floor, right? Because it doesn't think of any of these things as physics objects, they're just models. So if I select my box, my serial box, I'm going to go to nCoth and create a passive collider. And what we should start seeing is it's sticking to the bottom of my box. Now again, we'll mess with this. This isn't looking great. This is like sprinkling sugar on something. So this is where this is going to start getting powerful, because I don't want a bunch of little tick marks. I want my little chocolatey cereal. Okay, so I'll call this my serial object, right? I'm going to select that serial object, and I'm going to select this NParticle1 right there. Right, and that's the shape, not the emitter, but the NParticle1. And I'm going to go under NParticles and click on Instancer. So the thing you're going to see is that one piece of serial that I made is now being instanced, being replaced for each of those particles, right? So look at that. We have a lot of particles that are happening there. But it's kind of weird. Now they're like blowing through each other, right? There's no, like, they're all like, you know, clashing through each other, and when they're not really bouncing off of each other. Because even though we're instancing this shape, Maya is still thinking of each of these particles as a little bitty tick mark, right? So let's go into our NParticle1 and start playing around with that a little bit and seeing what we get. Okay, so I have under collisions, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click self collide. So that means that particles are going to collide with themselves. And you'll see right off we're getting something a little different. So now they're colliding a little bit more, but they're still kind of blowing through each other. And that's because Maya still doesn't know how big we want this object to be. Even though we're instancing the sphere, it's still thinking of it as a tick mark with a certain amount of size, right? So we can see what that is under this solver display. If I turn this on to collision thickness, we should be able to start seeing that. Now, collide with scale, let's see. Oh, is that not working? Maybe I have to hit play before I start doing it. Okay. I'm not sure why it's not letting me see that. Maybe I have to get, oh, apparently I can't see it in viewport 2.0. That doesn't make sense, but alright. If I go to my different renderer under legacy default viewport, I'm able to see it. I've seen it in viewport 2.0 before though, so I have a feeling this is a little bit of a bug, right? And so this little yellow ball is going to allow me to tell Maya this is the size of my my ball, right? And so it's going to collide with the box as if that were its size, right? So it's not really going to blow through the box, right? But you'll still see that they're kind of colliding with themselves a little bit. So if I change that from collision thickness to self-collision thickness, I can sort of play around with that a little bit. Let's see. My experience is usually we can make these a little bit bigger, and we're going to get so we can start playing around with self-collision thickness, making that even bigger, and seeing if we get a better result. I don't know why that's interpenetrating still yet. That still shouldn't be. There we go. So we're just going to play around with that until they're, you know, sort of simulating appropriately. Right? Now, something to consider with this, each of these little points has a set of dynamic properties, and that includes mass. So this means how much is gravity pulling on it, right? So even though we're playing every frame at the max real time, like look how slow that cereal is falling. Imagine dropping a piece of cereal over the cereal box and it taking it multiple seconds to get to the bottom of it, right? So we can play around with stuff like mass. I could make my mass for the cereal 10, and it maybe fall a little bit faster then, right? We can play around with a lot of different things, including the force of gravity. Some of this may be because of our size of our scene. Right now, that's our grid, and so this is actually a pretty, depending on how we're referring to each of these units, Maya is going to calculate this physics based off of that. So that's where this nucleus node comes in, right? Like if we wanted gravity to feel stronger, now it's 9.8, we could do 98 instead, and gravity's just going to pull on everything, faster and harder, and it's just going to pour in there a little bit quicker, right? So we can play around with those things. The other thing I can play with is right now I'm trying to fill up my box, and that's going to take forever at that speed. So if I change this to something like 1,000 a second instead of 100, I'm going to be able to fill up my box way quicker, right? Actually, I think I'll be able to do it in about 60 seconds. There are 60 frames this way. So let's do that. If I were to play this for 60 frames and say that's the number of cereal I needed in that box, maybe even longer, maybe I'd even do it longer. Then I could turn off the emitter. I could just turn off this particles per second. I could take it from 1,000 to 0 over one frame, and it would just stop emitting, right? All these particles are going to continue to live forever, so it doesn't really matter. But I also I can do that and then turn it off on frame 60 and then start rendering my final scene where I'm moving the box starting on frame 100, or I could have it sort of pre-populate this box with these particles in the negative numbers. So currently I'm at frame 1. I want to do negative 200, right? I'm just going to give it a little bit of time to settle. Now if I go back to negative 200 and hit play, you'll see that it's not emitting anything. It's actually not going to start emitting until we get to frame 1. So you'll see, and there it's just going to start spitting them out again, right? I also realize I need to probably make my ground plane here. I probably need to make that a passive collider. And that way stuff will bounce off of it. Anyway, now the reason it's not emitting in these negative numbers is because we haven't told it to. So nucleus, if I click the nucleus node, this is again the physics controller, right? And if I go down to time attributes, you'll see that its start frame is 1. I can change that to negative 200 and go ahead and start simulating. And so you'll see that it's going to simulate and start filling up this box starting in negative 200, right? I'm going to stop around frame, let's say frame 120, right? So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to go to my emitter, and on negative 120, while it's still set at 1,000, I'm going to right click and say set key. And then on frame 120 or 119, the very next frame, I set that to 0, right click, set key. And so what it's going to do is it's going to emit these particles until it gets to frame 120, and then it's suddenly just going to stop. Or it's going to go from 1,000 particles a second to 0. And then my box can fill up. So apparently that's more than I really need to fill my box. So I'm actually going to move that to earlier. Right, so that's just a set of keyframes. I can hold shift, highlight that, slide it back. Let's try, we were doing 60 earlier, but let's try it at 50. That's seeming more reasonable. I don't want my box completely full of cereal. Right. There we go. And let's look at how many we get in there. Yeah, it's a pretty decent amount of cereal. Right. Now, of course, cereal went everywhere. So part of that is because I'm starting this emitter outside of the box. So I can lower that down, get that in here inside of it a little bit. And then when I hit play, yeah, it's going to spit some of them out. Let's try that again. So what if I move this way down here? Try that. I'm really trying to not pop too many of them up out of there. Some of this could possibly be changed by the speed in which they're emitting. So I can emit those at like 0.5. But then again, we could also just emit for a little bit longer, because some of it's just the collisions that are happening where they're emitting so fast. So I probably could just change how long this emits. Make that emit like for 100 frames, right? But just change that first keyframe to, let's go and leave that at 1. Sorry. Change this first keyframe to, let's say 600 instead of 1000. So set key. What's that look like? If we just emit for 600 frames, are we going to get enough of them to fill up our box? Or 600 particles a second. That's actually a lot. Okay. So I could probably even still have that earlier. Okay, so after we have that, give it time to settle down. Of course, a couple of them popped out. We would have to continue to play around with this just a little bit. Maybe raise my emitter up a little bit more. They're all colliding. So, alright, this is interesting. So I think I'm still just going to have to play around with this some more. I think still 600 a second is too many. I'm going to go ahead and take mine down to like here and change that from 600 to like 400. And so there, yeah, they're not popping up out of there quite as bad now. Okay, so that's definitely a little bit more reasonable. We're getting a couple of them that are popping up out of there, but we can still work with that. Worst case scenario, I would put like something over top of here to block them, and then move it before the animation starts. Okay, so once I have that, I can start my animation now at frame 1. Okay, so by frame 1, all of those pieces of cereal are in there, right? And so I can start animating my cereal box, sort of picking up and moving toward. Oh, that's interesting. I don't know if that's actually showing up in render like that, but so it's all right that these are coming out of the bottom. I'm more worried about them popping out the sides. I'm not really seeing that in the render, but if so, that would just mean I need to change sort of the size, right? So I want to pick up my cereal box, sort of turn it, set this to world, do like a 90-degree turn here, and go back to object, and just kind of rotate it and pour some cereal in the cereal bowl. Okay. So let's watch what happens now when this happens. So Need to make sure that's not actually rendering that way. I'll do that really quick here. If so, it means I need to, yeah, so it's not really rendering through the side of the box like it looks like it is in the side. So once I get all that cereal in there, what we're going to see is the cereal box is going to pick itself, or we're going to pick it up because we animated it to do that. Now, of course, I set the keyframes by hitting S. And so, oh, what are you doing? That didn't work quite the way I thought it was going to, did it? So, a couple of things we're missing here. I'm just going to sit there and pour them out forever. So one is this isn't a blocking object yet, right? So again, I want to go to cloth, create a passive collider out of that. So the other thing is I'm not really happy with that keyframe that it's set. Now if I move this again, it's going to look like it's messing up, but again, it's because it's not evaluating every frame. So really, I'm going to delete this keyframe I made here. I think I need to make that differently. I think it's when I went to world. So if I do something like this, move it up, again hit S to set that keyframe. Oh, that's interesting. So obviously that's not working the best in the world. I have to, there we go. So we get those extra keyframes, right? So it's going to pour cereal. I'll go ahead and let it pour for a few seconds there. Go ahead and hit S, and then I'm going to take it back down to our ground plane. Right? And so I'm going to let it fill up again. Again, I'm not too worried about these popping out just yet. Now let's see what happens. There we go. So here's where we have to start adjusting our animation. I love this part. I'm sure it's going to sling cereal everywhere, right? So it's really hard to get exactly the right motion to pour that cereal into the cereal box, or to the cereal bowl, right? And we're getting a mess here right now. I'll look at something really quick. It's really weird that we would get this error now, but we are. I'll show you this. I don't necessarily know why. I think the easiest way would have been to animate this from scratch, but we're getting some really weird curves in our graph editor for this rotation. I don't know why, but there's a way of fixing it. What's happening is there's a dozen different ways you can, or not a dozen, there's infinite different ways you can get from one rotation to another, right? Like if I were going to turn from facing forward to facing backwards, the easiest way is just to rotate in one axis all the way around, to turn around, right? But you could also get there by lying down on your back, rolling over on your face, and then standing back up again, right? It's not the most efficient way of getting there, but it works. So Maya's found a way that works, but it's definitely not the most efficient path. And that's why we're getting a little bit of this like weird bobble in the box there when it goes back. When it would just make sense for it to just rotate sort of straight back. So if I grab all of these curves and go to curves, Euler filter, it's going to change the way it interpreted that motion and hopefully give us a better result. It's a little bit of a better result coming back there. It's still not great. I mean, in the end, I would probably actually reanimate this. I feel like there's something weird going on with those keys. But for right now, this will work. And what we hope to see is as much of this cereal getting in the bowl as possible. Now all these little pieces popping up, maybe we'll slow down the emission again so it doesn't pop up quite as much. Maybe take that speed back down again. A whole bunch of different things we could change. But once we start animating our cereal box, this is going to have to be us controlling the keyframes in order to get this cereal pouring into the bowl, right? So when it starts getting full, I need to set it down, and I need to set the box back down in a way that doesn't throw cereal everywhere. Right? I need to. Right now it's sort of tossing it everywhere. And so this is going to be a lot of work to make this happen. So this is why FX Artist is a job, right? Not just a button you click on your computer. Is because we're getting a simulation here. This is totally simulating in terms of how physics should work, right? But it's really hard to get that cereal to pour directly into the bowl, right? Using a physics simulation and a bunch of numbers. And so we have to sort of make changes to this over time to make it work more effectively. So let's pretend that this is exactly what I wanted, right? After all of the changes I make to the speed of the emitter, whatever, I want to go ahead and change that, lower that a little bit, not negative 5, sorry, 0.5, right? All of this different stuff. I make subtle changes to the animation. Maybe I make this box set down a little slower, right? Change the path of the animation, all sorts of different stuff. Let's pretend like this is exactly what we wanted it to be, right? At that point, what I need to do is go back to frame 200, and of course we would watch it over and over again. We would get close to the simulation we want, but when it's perfect, when it's doing what we want or acting the way we want it to, the problem with that is it won't do that forever, right? I can save it, I can go home, I can come back tomorrow and hit play, and I'll probably get a different simulation. Maya is calculating as much stuff as it can, but every simulation is slightly different. Every time we hit play, it interprets all this stuff so subtly different, and those subtle differences result in, a different simulation. So we may have one where it's perfect, and then the next time we play it, one of these pieces of cereal falls out of the bowl, right? So if we had this perfect, let's pretend we did, or let's pretend it's at least exactly what we wanted it to do, or want it to be, then we want to cache that out. We want to save that out, okay? So it's C-A-C-H-E, not C-A-S-H. And that means we're going to, save some data that says stop simulating and always play it in exactly this way, right? It's kind of like saving keyframes on all of these different particles, right? So if I go to nCache, create a new cache, you'll see this N object and Maya fluids, right? And so if we haven't set our project, this is going to be a big issue, but if we've set our project, we can hit N object, and what Maya is going to do is it's going to simulate it one more time, but when it's done simulating it, it's going to be permanently like that. Now, I say it's semi-permanently. I can always go back and delete that cache and make changes to the simulation and recache it. But this is going to allow us to scrub back and forth in our timeline without it blowing to the bottom of the box and all of that stuff. Okay, so I'm caching it right now, and it's saving a file in my Maya project, and when we're done, we'll be able to see it'll play back in much more real time, but it'll always be the same simulation then. If you try to render this without caching it, Maya's going to interpret it different for every frame. You may get a lot of issues with that. And these little particles, instead of seeming like they're reacting correctly, are just going to bounce all over the scene. They're going to fly everywhere. We're going to get a lot of issues with it by doing that. So once we're done, I can squeeze those particles off from under, those balls off from under it. Okay. 200. Okay. And so now when I scrub my timeline, you'll actually see I can play this animation in reverse, right, or forward, right? And if I hit play from my camera, let me go ahead and move that under the table. That's that original piece of cereal, right? We can watch the way this cereal looks. It looks like there's something in there, like eating the cereal and throwing it out, right? So starting on frame 0, that's where we would start rendering. It's going to play this animation. So now it's always going to be the same animation. Right? Now again, if I want to make changes to this, and I do, I don't want that serial going everywhere, I can go in here and go to end cache, and then I can delete that cache. And now when I scrub through, it's going to mess it all up again and everything. And so I have to re-simulate to get the right result. But that's okay. I want to be able to mess around with this until I get it perfect, and then cache it out and render that. So hopefully this makes sense. No, it's a little complicated. I know there's a lot going on in here, but know that this is a really efficient way of being able to get all of these little pieces of cereal falling into your cereal bowl. I will say, as sort of a little caveat, if you're wanting your cereal to be different shapes, this isn't always the easiest solution. Like if you're wanting a bunch of cornflakes or little magic hearts and mushrooms or whatever for Lucky Charms, this is still going to simulate like a point, and so it doesn't get as much rotation and stuff like that on it. So it looks kind of flat when we do it that way, but this still works. This still works pretty good. So so hopefully this has been helpful. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.